Good to see you all. We're going to measure the applause after the speech and see, then we'll talk about 100 megahertz. Would that it were in my power alone. Thank you, Meredith. And it really is terrific to be here and to join you to share NTIA's views on the importance of spectrum and the importance to echo the prior speakers about the future of the wireless industry for this country. And I'll just start by saying, the US is in an era of high-stakes technology development. From artificial intelligence to semiconductor manufacturing, whoever leads in innovation will lead the world in economic growth and national security. The Biden administration is answering the call to maintain our global competitiveness. The administration is taking a comprehensive approach to advancing network infrastructure through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the CHIPS and Science Act, NTIA's Wireless Innovation Fund, and other federal grant programs. Internationally, we're working to promote a secure, dynamic, and scalable 5G ecosystem, including by pursuing greater harmonization of key 5G bands. And last fall, the administration issued the National Spectrum Strategy. I see Scott Harris here in the front row. Can't think about the National Spectrum Strategy without thinking of you, Scott, and your leadership. Thank you. That strategy is a blueprint to help meet our nation's spectrum needs, harness innovation, and build economic and national security for years to come. Today, I want to share how we are working to achieve the goals of the 4 pillars of the strategy. I'll also discuss how our international work complements the strategy, and I'll share some details on our efforts to secure the wireless supply chains at home and abroad. First, when it comes to the wireless space, the US has always been the leader. We need clear and bold spectrum policies to stay that way. And I'm proud to say our national spectrum strategy delivers on those policies. The starting point, our first pillar, is building a spectrum pipeline so that wireless providers and users have the tools that they need to compete and to innovate. To accomplish this, the strategy calls for near-term, in-depth study of spectrum bands, including the key mid-band spectrum we've identified in the lower 3 gigahertz and 7 to 8 gigahertz ranges. And we're already hard at work on those study efforts. We are establishing spectrum study groups, which will govern and oversee the groups that will conduct the technical work. The involved federal agencies, including DoD, the Department of Defense, are seeking funding for the studies from the Spectrum Relocation Fund, absolutely essential to make sure they have the resources to do this work. Private, non-federal stakeholder engagement will be welcomed in this process, and more information is going to be coming soon on that. The spectrum strategy also calls for stronger coordination among stakeholders going forward, not just for these key spectrum studies, but across all future decision-making. This is the often sort of unglamorous, I say it's unsexy work sometimes, that actually makes a huge difference over time. These efforts to entrench coordination, to do real long-term planning, they're incredibly important. They build on the spirit that we generated in the Joint Coordination Initiative that I launched with the FCC Chairwoman Rosenworcel about 2 years ago, and continued that effort produced an NTIA and FCC Memorandum of Understanding update that hadn't been done in years. And we need more of that kind of coordination. We've also begun to explore how existing groups and structures, like our CSMAC Advisory Committee, can be empowered and leveraged to enhance the coordination framework that's envisioned in the strategy. The third pillar of the strategy calls for the development of new and innovative spectrum-based technologies, including dynamic spectrum sharing. We need to make better use of the airwaves we have, and technology will help. As many of you know, DoD is starting a project to demonstrate potential dynamic spectrum sharing, or DSS solutions, that could enable sharing in the lower 3 gigahertz band. While we hope this effort will inform spectrum sharing in the future for this band and others, I want to emphasize that it is also separate from the lower 3 gigahertz technical studies under the first pillar of the strategy. These are separate efforts. So we're looking at both of them. And the strategy calls for both that study as part of our band studies and the establishment of a national DSS testbed. The federal government will also develop recommendations for a common platform for spectrum sharing among federal users and between federal and non-federal users. And this common platform may well include the concept of the Incumbent Informing Capability, IIC, which will lead to more automated and dynamic sharing. Meanwhile, work has already begun on developing a national spectrum R&D plan, also called for in our strategy. This effort is being led by the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, NTIA and other federal agencies, including notably the National Science Foundation, are actively supporting this work. And this plan will be informed by input from federal and non-federal stakeholders, and it's going to be coordinated by our newly chartered Interagency Spectrum Advisory Council, or calling it the ISAC. The fourth and final pillar of the National Spectrum Strategy calls for the creation of a national spectrum workforce to grow the ecosystem of spectrum experts. Like this workforce surge that we needed for cybersecurity and still that we need for AI, this plan reflects our nation's growing need to strengthen, expand the ranks of spectrum technologists that America will need to address the critical tech issues of the future. I'll say anybody who's tried to hire, as we are trying to hire spectrum experts into their organization knows how hard it is today, and it's only going to get harder as demand increases. So we're trying to develop a spectrum community that itself is a crucial resource for American innovation with active participation from across the US government. NTIA and NSF will lead the work of creating a national spectrum workforce plan. The plan will be complemented by best practices for individual government agencies for their own recruitment and training programs. This will allow the government to work in tandem with academia and industry to develop a coherent approach to building the talent pipeline that we need. The work to advance spectrum policy doesn't stop at our borders. Internationally, we've focused on harmonization of spectrum allocations. At WRC 23, within the ITU Region 2 in the Americas, we've identified parts of the 3 gigahertz band for 5G services. As you know, in the US and other countries, there are critical government systems that require careful consideration and protection in 3 gigahertz. Still, this identification will enable governments to introduce 5G in portions of the band that will help many of you all reach the scale you need to deploy your networks efficiently. And again, with the National Spectrum Strategy, we are assessing if more of that 3 gigahertz range could be made available in the United States. The 7 to 8 gigahertz band has also been teed up internationally for study in tandem with our effort to study it domestically. So trying to make these all work hand in hand. Let me turn now to supply chains, where NTIA has been hard at work advancing trusted, open, and interoperable networks both at home and abroad. This work is critical because we are in the midst of a global battle over the future of wireless networks. 5G is a dynamic technology, but today's market for wireless equipment is static and highly consolidated. Just a few firms today provide the full set of radios and supporting components that power most mobile networks. And some of those equipment makers pose national security risks to the US and to our allies around the world. In particular, we know the Chinese government invests heavily in 5G infrastructure, both domestically and abroad, to promote its industry champions, Huawei and ZTE. Through its foreign aid practices, the PRC works to extend its influence by offering financing and other incentives to build 5G networks for partner countries. That creates dependencies and expands the PRC's technology footprint. We have engaged partners around the world to promote trusted alternatives to these suppliers. NTIA has been a champion for industry's development of Open RAN to develop and to allow for flexibility across networks, promote competition in the vendor ecosystem, and to help drive down costs. I'm thrilled to share that our Institute for Telecommunication Sciences is planning an inaugural International Open RAN Symposium this September in Boulder. Mark your calendars. It's going to bring together a diverse set of international stakeholders to address and discuss collaboration in Open RAN testing. This complements our work domestically on the 2023 5G Challenge and our $1.5 billion Wireless Innovation Fund. The 5G Challenge promoted open interfaces, interoperable systems, secure networks, and awarded almost $7 million in grants. NTIA has also awarded over $140 million to 17 projects from the Wireless Innovation Fund to support open and interoperable networks. And we're going to have more to share soon on the next steps for that fund. I've shared a lot about what NTIA is doing in the wireless and spectrum space. I will say to achieve these goals, these ambitious goals, we are going to need your help. NTIA needs the help of this community to maintain the momentum that we've started under this national spectrum strategy. We need continued engagement from spectrum stakeholders, from the diverse set of industries that rely on spectrum, from academics who study spectrum, from federal agency leaders. The US is in the midst, as I've said, of an intense competition for global leadership in wireless technologies. We need to be smart, we need to be strategic, we need to be collaborative and work together, we need to be evidence-based. Importantly, we are also going to need the help of Congress. In particular, we need spectrum auction authority restored by Congress. And I'll just say what we've been seeing in the recent days and weeks on Capitol Hill, we believe are steps in the right direction. And I hope we can all work together to achieve a solution here. We believe that legislation can be crafted that's consistent, heavily consistent with our national spectrum strategy and advances our shared agenda. These are efforts to sustain the lifeblood of your networks, to expand access to an input that is vital to the long-term success of this industry. And I would just say where we have disagreements or different ideas about where legislation could go, please just remember, it would be a mistake to let the perfect be the enemy of the very good. In closing, the Biden administration has implemented an ambitious, long-term agenda for spectrum policy change and advanced spectrum management. We all have our work cut out for us now. The agenda that I've spoken about, as embodied in the National Spectrum Strategy, has never lost sight of its core goal: to make sure there are sufficient spectrum resources to fuel American innovation and global competitiveness in order to meet the needs of both the private and the public sector. It is essential to our economic and national security, and I'll just say the US wireless industry is at the very center of this vision. So thank you for your leadership and your partnership as we work to pursue this vision together. Thank you.